Hey, CJ, thank you so much for showing up today. Please introduce yourself and a little bit about your background. I would love for my community to hear about you.
Sure. Thanks, Milos, for having me. I'm happy to be your first, and I'm sure it's going to be a long line of some very interesting and great content. A lot of people don't know the expertise that you have, but I think they're going to see it in the value that you deliver. So exciting to watch what comes from you. So I'm
Thank you.
CJK. I've been in the industry for about 10 years. Um, and Bitcoin has really just transformed everything about my mindset, my economic behaviors, you name it, it's done it. You know, the meme Bitcoin fixes this is proven on this side of the coin. And it's just exciting to watch it continue to grow, being institutionalized on Wall Street as gold, digital gold 2.0. But
Hmm.
ultimately, I think, what's most exciting is that that's kind of like an old narrative. Bitcoin is very quickly evolving into collateral, digital collateral. It's kind of like a hybrid of gold and treasuries. Gold
Hmm.
made great collateral because it was a store of value. You couldn't increase the supply at will, but it made horrible collateral because it was cheap, too expensive to not cheap. It was too expensive to secure and
Hmm.
to settle. U.S. Treasuries were cheap to settle, but there's no hard cap on the supply. And when the supply gets abused, you lose that store value element. So here comes Bitcoin, this perfect little hybrid asset that is now turned itself into an emerging asset class and is being recognized as digital gold, but really is becoming this hybrid collateral asset that can underpin the entire financial system, getting the best attributes of gold, being hard and having an absolute scarce supply of 21 million, but also those same valuable pickups from the US treasuries, which are easy and cheap to secure and settle. So you get the best of both worlds, which really provides a great opportunity for humanity to move forward and to upgrade our systems. And Bitcoin is at the base layer of that upgrade.
Amazing, and thank you for the introduction. I would love to hear about current state of Bitcoin, when it comes to scalability, and how do you see it evolving in the future?
Yeah, so I think obviously right now the main source of demand for Bitcoin, I think, is very evident that it's store of value, right? So when you talk about
Mhm.
where do we see the value proposition of Bitcoin right now versus where we see it in the future? Well, the very clear value proposition of right now of Bitcoin is store of value. And
Mhm.
the why is that a solution? Why is that a value proposition? What's the problem that this solves? And the problem is really the abuse of governments to their ability to print and issue debt and create inflation. And a
Mhm.
lot of people get mad when or triggered when they hear that. But I do have to say, like the fiat currency system could be handled in such a way that it was actually deflationary, right? Like
Mhm.
if we didn't issue a whole bunch of credit and debt, then the dollar would actually be deflationary. So it's not necessarily that the system itself is like broken or stupid or doesn't make sense. It's just that that
Mhm.
human variable, that same human variable that messed up the equation in Rome and in Greece and in Venezuela and Weimar Germany and in Argentina over
Mhm.
it never changes. The nature of humanity is not going to change, and because that human element is involved in the equation, what we're seeing is here we are yet again in this new system where the human element is abusing the system and misusing the system. So Bitcoin is really has emerged from that abuse as a way to protect
Mhm.
your value, as a way to store your time and energy without allowing uh, an authority to dilute the value of that time and energy. Because one thing about Bitcoin, and this, believe it or not, this does tie into scalability. The store of value is the base layer of value proposition. But think about gold, right? The base value proposition about gold and why gold was money for thousands of years was because you could properly store value. Why? Because it took a lot of costs to expand the supply. So it properly offered the solution of store of value across time. But what happened was they issued paper currency units that were a derivative of the gold, right? And the
Mhm.
paper was supposed to represent the gold. What did that do? That's layer 2 scalability. That's
Right.
Lightning Network, right? So if
Yeah.
Bitcoin was gold, then paper currency units being derivatives of the reserve asset gold is an L2 scaling solution. And that L2 scaling solution for gold turned it from not just a store of value, but also into a medium of exchange. So that's a very
Mhm.
exciting process that Bitcoin is going to go through right now. Not only going from magic internet money and digital gold, but really going through that same scalability problem, right? Like we can't bring gold into the store and weigh it out. The velocity of money can't
Mhm.
increase. It's being limited by the functionality of the gold itself. Okay, let's just make paper. Okay, well, the velocity of Bitcoin can't increase because we don't want to increase the block size and give up the decentralization. And we don't want to make that trade off. And that's the right choice. Don't make that trade off. So there's going to be a L2 solution. And that L2 solution for
Mhm.
gold was the fiat currency units. But the L2 solutions for Bitcoin, we don't know what I think there's going to be. Look at the central banks in the world. Everybody always says, like, um, is there one solution? There's never one solution. There's not one company that rules the whole world. It doesn't work that way. The marketplace is so big, no one company could ever facilitate the worldwide marketplace. So there's going to be lightning. There's going to be, talk about the paper derivatives. There's going to be fiat currencies of every country in the world derived and
Mhm.
supposed to be originally backed by that gold, but since moved off. So all of that is going to happen for Bitcoin, and when it evolves from the store of value and also adds the additional value proposition of medium of exchange, because now the velocity of now it makes sense to buy a coffee with your Bitcoin, right? Like if you're gonna send Bitcoin and it costs you $2 to send your Bitcoin, it doesn't really make sense to buy a $7 coffee and pay $2 to spend your Bitcoin.
Right.
But
Yeah.
if you're a firm in Japan that buys something from the Silk Road and you have to settle with these people and you need to settle $4 billion and it costs you $2 to send $4 billion and it's secure and it's done in 10 minutes, that's a really high value proposition, right? So the store value settlement layer is a very big base layer of money that can be the collateral and the underpinning to the whole system. It's the further out development of Bitcoin, turning it into a medium of exchange with solutions like Lightning and
Mhm.
eCash and all this other stuff. All these L2 solutions, they're all valid, and the marketplace will decide which one is best and which one makes sense. I think a lot of economic incentive is going to be behind which solution eventually performs the best, but solutions will be there no matter what. There will not be just one solution. There will be
Mhm.
multiple solutions, and that's going to ultimately, what that does is that adds another base layer of demand to Bitcoin. So the base layer of demand to Bitcoin will move from just being a store of value to now also being a medium of exchange. And what's so interesting about that is if you look at what happened with the gold experiment, where finally it's like, hey, we have something, we finally solved the coincidences of want, right? Like we have a barter system that now I don't need to rely on my strawberries staying fresh or my chickens staying alive, right? Like I can store the
Yeah.
value of what I produced in my money comfortably over time. And now I
Mhm.
found an easier way to move that money over time. Well, it the layer 2 solution for gold was so effective. It was
Mhm.
so good that banks and governments started creating more paper units because of the demand for those units, right? It was the demand for the money that created the credit market. So that,
Mhm.
the velocity of money onboarded so much demand onto the network, the gold network, that
Mhm.
banks were basically forced to move to fractional reserves because there was
Mhm.
just so much demand for the money. Because what that did was it opened up the human economy. It opened up people to be able to specialize in what they specialize. I no longer have to tend to my farm and raise my animals. I can just build sheds all day because my neighbor Johnny, he tends to the animals and I get my milk and eggs from
Mhm.
him. And that's what he wants to do. Well, I like to build sheds. So then people can start to specialize in what they do. And that accelerates the economy because it results in more production and more consumption.
Mhm.
And that's the definition of a growing, healthy economy. So I think it's really exciting for Bitcoin. A lot of people are like, oh, these layer 2 wars and solutions are scams and we're going into the big block, small block debate. But no, this is a really fun process because when you look at what happened to gold after its layer 2 solution went live, demand exploded, and it really created the explosion of that system was mismanaged because it came down to the human element making decisions, and they made the wrong decisions. But with Bitcoin, we have coded decisions. We have hard coded decisions that aren't going to change. And then if some of those things change or are upgraded, it's going to take a community effort in order to make that happen. So this time, the human variable is better caged than it was when gold evolved from that store of value and added that base layer of demand of medium of exchange. With Bitcoin, yes, it's the store of value. It's 60% CAGR. You can't beat it. But when these L2 solutions start to become effective, and now the velocity of Bitcoin can increase and it becomes a store of value plus a medium of exchange, watch out, because you're going to see the demand for the asset itself increase, and against a limited supply. And there's only one thing that can happen when that happens, and the price will go up because the value proposition is increasing. So it's amazing to be watching it happen. What a time to be alive.
Amazing. So are you arguing that the same mistakes cannot happen with the layer 2, with all these solutions on the layer 2?
No, I'm not arguing that, because I definitely think that's why I said the human variable was caged. I didn't say it was removed from the equation.
Entirely. Okay.
It's caged because basically what you're getting is fractional reserves, right? Just look at FTX. Nobody needs to look any further than FTX to understand that when you get into these types of derivative situations, you can artificially increase the supply of Bitcoin. Now, the difference is with Bitcoin is when the hammer comes down in the TradFi system, they just print money to grease it over, right? Like, oh, you're going to collapse? No problem. We'll bail you out. Well, you can't do that. You know, when Sam and FTX needed however many Bitcoin they needed, they couldn't nobody could print it for them. So, so there are some checks and balances. I think what Bitcoin does, why Bitcoin is better, is that it guarantees that creative destruction. So our economy right now, stocks are making all-time highs. People are still trying to figure out, like, hey, we're supposed to have demand destruction. Why are things still trading at all-time highs? What the hell's going on here? But the fact of the matter is that with these stocks and everything else, the amount of liquidity that's being injected into the system is supporting that. And that all comes back to the human element. That all comes back to like when the banks were failing and SVB failed, what did the Federal Reserve do? They created the Bank Term Funding Program. And the Bank Term Funding Program allowed banks to bring their fixed income assets to the lending window and borrow against them, not at market value like everybody else would have to do, but at par value. So they just printed the difference between the market value and the par value of the note or the bond, and boom, problem's gone. The banks that they wanted to failed, and the banks that they wanted to get bailed out had access to the window, and their liquidity problems disappeared. Bitcoin doesn't allow
fake, for that, right? Which is indeed insincere,
yes, exactly. Bitcoin doesn't allow for that. But what it really does is it disrupts the economic cycle, because you should go through a time of economic boom, and through that economic boom, just naturally, because of the human element, the human variable, people are going to make bad decisions. People are going to borrow money to invest in stupid things that don't work, and they're going to lose. Credit is going to be created and destroyed, but there's going to be coming a time where you get to the top of that, the peak of that economic growth. And when it starts to turn down, you need to have those companies destroyed. Like if you look at the US stock market today, there is an alarming amount of US companies that trade publicly on the US stock market that are officially what they call zombie companies.
Zombies, yeah.
So just look into what a zombie company is. It's not hard to understand. If we didn't have bailouts, if we didn't have a system that allowed us to just bail people out and avoid the destructive part of the economic cycle, these companies would not exist today. But these companies are still here, and they're still not being as productive as they could be because the mismanagement is not being punished. Because the free market, and that's not to say a person or the government has to punish mismanagement, the free market itself will punish mismanagement. But what the human variable is doing is coming in and printing money to cover up the
Mm-hmm.
mismanagement. And that's why we're in the largest asset bubble in the history of humanity, because the destructive part of the economic cycle is not allowed to take place. Because once you get little tidbits of it, sure, every once in a while, like those couple banks failed, right? SVB, Signature, yeah, there
Mm-hmm.
were a couple banks that failed, but to be honest with you, 9 out of 10 banks should have failed, not just a couple out of 100 of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. So yeah, a couple things start to go wrong, and then you lower interest rates, print money, you do whatever you need to do, whatever the human variable needs to do to maintain the status quo and to keep control. It gets done, and it gets done at the price of the economy, because the economy doesn't get
Mm-hmm.
to go through the destructive process, so that prices can reset, so that the economy and credit markets can reset, so that the dollar has a deflationary cycle where its purchasing power increases over a certain period of time. That is all being um, just forgotten about and printed over, so to say. But with Bitcoin, that destructive process, like with FTX, it's almost forced, right? It's a forced
Mm-hmm.
process. There is no escape. So in that way, um, I think we'll avoid a lot of problems. But that doesn't mean you can't have bad actors who artificially
Of
expand the
course.
supply of Bitcoin. It's just that they won't be able to get away with it.
Right. To have like a counter argument to that, and many would say, hey, yes, these would be a bad examples, but also perhaps printing money happened in a time when we had an unprecedented growth, uh, right, and rise in the living standards. So there is a concern if we go to that kind of a hard currency and something that Bitcoin doesn't allow for any room for error. Would it happen that also perhaps good projects and wouldn't be able to be financed? And I think that was one of the questions that I sent you in a Twitter maybe a few months ago. If there is no room for a mistake, maybe also the good actors would be punished. Do you think that is a valid concern?
Oh, I think it is now, because you've and the reason it is now is because you've bolstered up all these zombie companies, all this
Hmm.
mismanagement. So it's like, at first it was like you have 20 people walking through a forest, and maybe a lion sneaks up on you, or a tiger, and eats like two and kills two people in the back,
Hmm.
right? But okay, that's very sad, but they're gone, and now the people who
Hmm.
are left, and you make more people, and the line gets longer. But at this point, it's like that whole line has turned into a line of zombies. And maybe you have like
Right.
four healthy people leading a whole line
Hmm.
of zombies who just can't die. And when they finally do die, they're going to, because you depended on them for farming and this and that, because you already went through this process of growth, of specialization, where it's like,
Hmm.
hey, how comes people can't just plant fruit trees in their yard? If people just plant fruit trees in their yard, then nobody will go hungry. Yeah, the problem is that it's sad, but in an environment where everybody specializes in something, most
Hmm.
people can't plant fruit trees. Just dig a hole. Some people aren't can't physically do that. Just
Right.
just water it every day. Some people can't do that. Just pick the fruit and don't let it. They can't do it. So not
Hmm.
everybody, because we've moved into this process of specialization, which was enabled naturally by the economy, but it's been supported and abused by the printer. Yes, I
Hmm.
think at this point in time, if it were to fall, then even the good actors were going to get harmed, because the bubble has just gotten so large. The bubble has gotten so large that when
Hmm.
the bubble pops, everybody's falling from a height that is unsurvivable. If the
Hmm.
bubble popped when it was supposed to pop, when the first problem showed, and the economic trough was able to develop, and that destruction was
Hmm.
able to take place, well, then when you get back to the peak again, the good actors don't have any problem with that small, because it's about washing out the bad actors, not the good actors.
Hmm.
And then you get back to the trough, and you're right where you are. But it's just been up and up and up and up for so long that when it pops, we're going to fall so far that it's going to cause damage. And that damage is really defined by the lack of demand for US treasuries. But before I get into that, you said something which was interesting. We've had all this inflation, and it's led to growth. But I want to
Hmm.
counterpoint. I want to counterpoint you on that, because inflation is a problem. It's not a solution. right? So
Mm-hmm.
when they say, oh yeah, look, we've had 2, 3, 4% inflation, they refer to it sort of like as like a growth metric. Like, when
Mm-hmm.
inflation gets too high, the economy's too hot is almost what their argument
Mm-hmm.
is. But
Mm-hmm.
that's actually like the opposite of how the true free market works, because um well, let's just run through this as a common sense thing. If the price of an item goes up, does that create more demand or less demand?
Yeah, it's supposed to create less. Yeah.
More demand. If the price
No, if the price goes up, it should be less demand, right? Is it?
yes. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So when the price goes up, demand goes down. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, a strong economy, does it have less demand or more demand?
Strong economy should have more demand. Yeah.
Correct. So really,
Yeah.
in a strong, healthy economy, prices are actually coming down so that there can
Mm-hmm.
be more demand. But the reason that prices come down, so some of you might be like, well, hold on one second. How's that work? Here's why. Because what happens at first is that the increased demand raises the price, but that price
Mm-hmm.
is raising based off of the demand. It's not raising based off of the inflation. Remember,
Mm-hmm.
inflation passes through as a higher cost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Economic demand does not increase the cost for the producer. So when inflation takes place, the cost of production for the producer increases, which forces the market price higher. And if the producer doesn't move the market price higher, then their profit margin shrinks. So inflation forces prices higher through higher costs of production, which then have to get passed to the consumer, or else there's going to be less profitability.
Mm-hmm.
Economic demand pushes prices higher, but it does not push costs higher. Cost stays the same and price goes up because of the increased demand. When the price is higher and cost stays the same, profitability increases, right? So
Mm-hmm.
with inflation, producer profitability stays the same or decreases.
Or decreases even,
With a
yes.
strong, healthy economy, profitability increases. And then the producers can take that profit and reinvest it in expanding supply. And it's called
Mm-hmm.
marginal cost of production. In other words, it costs way less to make 10 million water bottles than it would uh, cost to make 1 million water bottles per water
Yeah.
bottle,
Red
right? So
water bottle. Yeah,
if
of
you make
course.
1 million water bottles, it might cost 10 cents per water bottle. But if you make
Mm-hmm.
10 million water bottles, it might only cost 7 cents per water
Seven.
bottle,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even cheaper. Who knows? But that
Right.
marginal cost of production will change based on the good or service that you're providing. But the point is that the producer becomes more profitable and then can reinvest in expanding supply, reducing their marginal cost of production. Now they're selling more units with an even lower cost, creating more profit, even though the price is lower, because now they can lower when their cost of production goes from 10 cents to 7 cents, they can lower the price of the water bottle. And when they lower the
Right.
price of the water bottle, that increases the demand. So they don't care about the lower front end price because their profitability margins remain the same, but now they're selling more units, and more
Mm-hmm.
units means more profit. So that's the definition of a healthy economy. When you talk about we've had inflation and inflation has produced growth, no, it hasn't. Profitability has
Mm-hmm.
not increased, and if it had increased, then the what would we would see the PE ratios for all the
Mm-hmm.
stocks, the price to earnings ratios would not be at where they are now at all-time highs, because the price of the
Mm-hmm.
stock would be healthy relative to the
Right.
earnings of the company because of the
Mm-hmm.
processes we just talked about. So the fact that PE ratios are going to the roof and some of them are at all-time highs is actually evidence that this inflationary growth does not produce profit. Sure, it makes the number
Mm-hmm.
on the screen go up, it makes the nominal number go up, but real wealth, real growth is not taking place.
It's
Inflation
not
is a
there.
fake growth that does not produce
Mm-hmm.
any profitability. And in fact, when they lie about the rate of inflation
Mm-hmm.
and the rate of inflation is higher than the rate of growth, real growth is negative. And if you look
Yeah.
at govflation.com, real growth is negative. That's just a matter of the mathematics without changing methodology, keeping the
Mm-hmm.
methodology the same and consistent without making tweaks to it. Real growth is negative because when you use a GDP deflator that reflects real inflation, which is 11% and not 3%, then the growth of the economy is negative, and all of this stuff starts to make sense. It's only when you tweak those numbers and pay attention to the government that things start to get confusing. So those who put forth that inflation is growth do not understand how inflation works and do not understand how a true free market generates
Hmm.
growth through temporarily increasing prices, but allowing producers to increase their supply, lower marginal cost of production, lower prices, and then include more participants in the economy, increased demand. So, what do we see? Increased production and increased consumption. That's the
Hmm.
definition of economic growth. With inflation, look at the price to sales ratios that we're seeing. Look at the sales numbers that the USA just reported. It's very clear. Americans are buying less and paying
Hmm.
more. That means more stuff is not being produced and less stuff is being consumed. Lower
Hmm.
production and lower consumption is the definition of a declining economy. So this is
Right.
this is
Right.
this is the problem. That is the you hit the nail on the head with the counter argument that some people would put forth
Hmm.
with that, because it's just not true, and the numbers and
Hmm.
the evidence are all pointing that we are in an inflationary recession right now, and if we keep making the wrong decisions, we'll end up in a hyperinflationary depression.
One thing that you mentioned now, if you're making a wrong decision, you're obviously referring to regulatory bodies who have an influence to print money. However, I think I remember some of your tweets where you actually mentioned that now they lost the ability and the power they had with the tools they had in place. How did that
Yeah,
happen? And can you expand on that?
yes, that is a fantastic question, and it's the most important topic in all of macro that nobody talks about. And even if I'm wrong, I would just love to hear someone tell me why I'm wrong, because I've brainstormed it, I've thought it through, and I don't think I'm wrong. And I want to know why I'm wrong. It's we learn from when we learn why we're wrong. We don't, being right all the time is
Hmm.
not the best thing. You want to be
Right.
wrong sometimes so that you can learn and that you can grow. I'm really waiting for one of those bigger guys out there, like a Luke Groman or a Lynn Alden or George
Hmm.
Gammon, or just please somebody tell me why I'm wrong, because this is what's happening right now. The US Treasury and the Federal Reserve have lost the power to create demand by raising interest rates. Now, that's actually a
Hmm.
really concerning statement, and as a US citizen, I personally feel that it should be on the level of national economic security concern. This should be the highest and best economists in our country, both public and private, should be working together to think tank this, because we have a big problem on our hand. And the problem is that there's fiscal dominance. So the Federal Reserve is using their monetary policy to try to create demand destruction and try to slow the rate of credit growth, right? Because when
Hmm.
interest rates go up, the price of money goes up, so the cost to borrow goes up, so people borrow less. The economy
Right.
starts to slow down. Um, that's called demand destruction, and that's working. We're seeing that work for sure. Um,
Hmm.
but that's not the only thing going on. That's like you're watching a hockey game. Shout out to the Florida Panthers, right? Where Stanley Cup champions are here in Florida. Well, that's like watching a hockey game and only paying attention to one person on the ice. If you're not paying attention to all the other people on the ice and where the puck is going versus where it just
Right.
is right now, you're not going to really enjoy the game that much. You have to watch it from that higher up level. I always love the seats. I love the first row on the top shelf because it gives you that best, no one's in front of you and you have that overhead view and you can really see how the players are moving on the ice and how fast the game really goes. But that's really what's happening right now. I think a lot of these regulatory bodies are so focused on, they're just getting pulled 1,000 different directions. I spoke at the Bitcoin Energy Summit not that long
Hmm.
ago, and I was on a panel with Congressman Byron Donalds, who is our Southwest Florida representative. And by the way, maybe tonight we'll learn that he was Trump's vice president. He was one of the
Hmm.
names on the list that could become the vice president
Vice President.
for
Hmm.
Donald Trump. So it was an honor to sit on that panel with him and have some time with him. And on the Financial Services Committee, they're talking about, um, part of the conversation is that hey, we have to pay attention to the level of demand on U.S. Treasuries, right? So this is not just two people on YouTube talking about lack of demand
Hmm.
on U.S. Treasuries. This is Congressman Byron Donalds, who told me to my face and a group of people at Bitcoin Energy Summit that on the United States Financial Services Committee, they are talking about lack of demand on U.S. Treasuries. And one of those solutions that the committee was looking at was the stablecoin bill, because the
Hmm.
stablecoin bill being passed here in the United States, forcing stablecoins that trade here in the United States to be reserve backed by US dollar cash or cash equivalents, would create
Hmm.
demand for those US treasuries. And the perfect example is Tether and USDC. Right? Tether is actually one of the largest US treasury holders in the world. I think like number 12 or 13 largest US
Hmm.
treasury holder in the world. And the stablecoin market continues to explode, going from just a few million to now up to 150 billion just between Tether and USDC. USDC Circle is a publicly traded company, and they hold short-term treasury debt, and that's publicly reported. So these stable coins are seen as a solution to the lack of demand on U.S. Treasuries, and they're so focused on that and focused on
Hmm.
other things too. That's just one thing, right? Like it could take a long time just to have that one conversation. We could do multiple episodes talking about that. Um,
Right.
Matter of fact, I think that stablecoin bill there. Anthony Pompliano Pomp
Hmm.
did a podcast the other day talking about how stablecoins could save the dollar. But something that nobody's talking about is if you pass that bill, if the U.S. Congress passes that stablecoin bill, now there will be two options for people in the United States. You will be able to keep your dollars in stablecoins that are legally required to be backed 1-to-1, or
Hmm.
you can keep your money in a bank deposit account, which is legally required to be backed 10 cents to one. And there is no, there actually, after COVID, there is no requirement. It's up to the bank. And then the bank
Hmm.
has that goes through stress tests and have to meet different liquidity levels and such, but there is no guaranteed requirement.
Hmm.
You can be banked, you could be backed from a penny to 10 cents for every $1 that you have. Imagine if something goes wrong and you have your money in a bank, and you only would get $10,000 back in terms of purchasing power, because they print the rest. You get everything back, but what you'd be able to buy with
Yeah.
it wouldn't be there, because the FDIC would have to print so much to cover all the insurance. But the point is that now you're offering a choice to the marketplace. And that is, hey, do you want to keep your money where it's backed 1-to-1? You have 24/7 access with nobody's permission, or would you like to keep it over here in the bank where you can get access Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, 9 to 6, and then on Saturday, like
Hmm.
8 to 2, and then
Yeah.
forget Sunday. Like if you need it for Sunday, come on Saturday when you need it. And by the way, bring your permission form too. If you want more than $10,000, you're going to need to let us know ahead of time so we can make sure that we can facilitate that transaction for you. Just like
Right.
so you're creating demand on treasuries by passing the stablecoin bill, but it might be like the Trojan horse to destroy the entire banking system, because when interest rates went up, people left the banking system and went to the money market funds, and that's what
Hmm.
created the banking crisis. That's why Silicon Valley Bank failed, because they already took the depositors' money and bought the fixed income assets. The interest rates went up. They bought it at a lower rate. They lost the difference between that rate movement. So that people wanted their deposits back to go over to the money market fund so they can get the higher rate. And that caused the bank run. Well, imagine people wanting to get their money out of the bank because they don't want it backed 10 cents to one. They don't want to have to ask permission to use it. They want it backed 1-to-1. And they want it
Right.
anytime they can use it 24/7. This could create a new crisis for the banking system. And people are just ignoring that. So they're focused on that. Is a perfect example where we could literally do an entire episode on just that Trojan horse of the stablecoin bill and what that can mean for the
Hmm.
U.S. banking system. And then we're supposed to expect that they, with everything else that they're handling, they're supposed to understand this too. So they're stretched so many different ways. And Byron said that too. I brought this up to Byron, and he said, no, no one ever made that point. And I hope he did make that point in the Financial Services Committee. Such a small world that a chance that CJK could have brought up a topic in the U.S. Congress Financial Service Committee. Amazing, but it's true, and that's how these things work. So, I say all that to say this: the Federal Reserve is not focusing on these problems, and they may not recognize it. But I think this is the biggest problem. And that's fiscal dominance, right? So going back to what
Hmm.
the Fed is doing with monetary policy, raising the interest rates to destroy demand. That's working on everyday people like you and me. We don't want to buy a
Right.
house because we're not going to pay 8-9% for a mortgage. We don't want to
Hmm.
put out credit at 30%. We don't want the market's frozen right now because nobody's incentivized because the costs are too high. So that creates demand destruction. But
Hmm.
you know who's not incentivized by the interest rates? The US government. The US
Hmm.
government is not behaving the way they should be behaving. Everybody else is behaving the way they should be behaving. There's been credit destruction. Sure, credit values have gone up, but there's no doubt that there's been demand destruction in the economy. You can see that in the sales numbers. You can
Hmm.
see it everywhere. So there's no doubt that that's working for the everyday person. But the government is almost immune to those incentives. The government doesn't care that the interest rate up. The U.S. government now pays more for the interest on its debt than it does for the U.S. military. It is now the number three line
Oh.
item in the US budget. Only Social Security and Medicare cost more than the US interest on debt. We spend more to pay the interest on our debt than we do to run our military. And to run our military, we pay more than everybody else in the world combined, just to give you an idea of how much we
Yeah.
spend on our military. So
Yeah.
combine every other countries in the world military spending, combine it together, we spend more than that. And we spend more on our interest on debt than we do on our military. And just a couple of years ago, we interest on debt was a non item. It was never even considered. It wasn't even a concern. But the government is not changing their spending behavior. We're spending $1 trillion every 100 days. We're running $3+ trillion deficits, and we're running it at higher rates. Plus, over the next 2 years, 11 trillion out of the $35 trillion in debt is going to mature and need to be rolled over. And it's not rolling over from zero, but it is rolling over to a higher rate, which is going to increase the
Hmm.
interest rate cost. So these interest rate costs are going to continue to climb. It very well could be that the interest rate cost flips Medicare and becomes the number two most expensive item, and eventually become number one most expensive item if they don't artificially state the rates back down, because the higher rates are not properly incentivizing the government to slow their
Hmm.
spending. The government is ignoring that incentive. Because that incentive is being ignored, it switches the paradigm. We move from a monetary dominance to a fiscal dominance. So when monetary
Hmm.
dominance is there, that would be like the 70s, like when they raised interest rates to 20%. But when they raised interest rate to 20%, the US government debt was not that large. The amount of interest payments that needed to be paid still didn't really matter. So it wasn't a big
Right.
deal. You could raise the interest rate. It was monetary dominance. What happened in the monetary decisions was more important than what was happening on the fiscal side, because there was no weight to that. There was no gravity to that increase in interest rate. There was no huge burden on the on
Hmm.
the on the government to pay interest expense when they raised the rate that high. But here we are now, so many years later, and we've piled up 36 trillion dollars of debt. We got another 216 trillion dollars of unfunded liabilities. We're sending money here and everywhere else, and rates are higher. And the math, this is not opinion. The math shows
Hmm.
that the interest rate expense has grown to now be the number three largest expense, very soon to be number two. And there's nothing they can do about it because it's already the size of the debt, right? Only paying off the debt would help, because that's the only way to avoid the interest accrual. So there's no way to avoid it. The when they raise the interest rates, they're increasing the amount of liquidity that needs to be borrowed and spent into circulation. And by the way, the people who they're paying it to are spending it back into the economy, increasing demand. So what happens? I say all that to say this: you would think, as a lender, you would say, oh, okay, well, if the US government wants me to lend them money, they could just raise their interest rate, right? Because when they raise their interest rate, it's going to attract demand. The higher the interest rate, the higher the demand for the debt. That's
Hmm.
actually why I think I always thought, like, interest rate. I remember when I was first learning it, I'm like, interest rate. Okay, hey, that makes sense. The higher the rate, the more interest. Not like interest earned, but like interest from people. Like, how do you
Hmm.
get people to buy your debt? How do I make you interested in buying my debt?
Right.
I have to
Yeah.
raise the interest rate. So the higher
Mhm.
that rate of earning is, the more interest
Attractiveness. Yeah.
from the people. So that's typically how it would work. The Federal Reserve would raise or the US Treasury would raise the interest rate, and then that would attract my demand, and I would lend them money because they're willing to pay a higher rate. Well, something's happened. When you raise the interest rate, because we're no longer in monetary dominant cycle and we're now in a fiscal dominant cycle, when you raise the interest rate, it actually forces more money to be printed on the fiscal side because you're raising
Mhm.
the interest rate against $35 trillion dollars of debt, $3 trillion dollars of deficit spending per year, $216 trillion dollars of unfunded liabilities over the next 50 years. All the cost to finance that and roll it increases significantly with each basis point that you increase the interest rate. And that means that the faster that money needs to be printed and borrowed, the faster the inflation takes place. So the interest rate going up is supposed to attract a lender, but me as the lender, I'm saying, hey, yeah, let's say they move the rate from 5.25 to 5.5 up to 6. I would say, hey, uh, okay, hey, now instead of 5, I'm getting 6. I'll lend them even more money, right? That's what you would expect the normal person to say. But I think some more astute money managers are starting to realize, well, wait a second. When they go to 6%, the national debt interest expenditures are going to be the number 2 highest cost, which means they're going to have to print more money, which is going to create more inflation,
Mhm.
which means the real rate of return is going to be lower. And I have to share this on Govflation because I think it's going to help people kind of just understand what I'm talking about when I say real rate. So let me see if I could pull this up and get us over there. Okay, cool. So here's like what the government's official government headlines versus like govflation headlines. And I'm not going to dive too deep into this because I want to stay focused on real rates. The real rate of return is the risk-free rate, so the US government debt treasury rate, and it could be, I would say typically it would be a bill, but it could be a note or a bond depending on how much wiggle room you want to give them. Right now, with an inverted yield curve, it's best to use the bills because you have the front end of the yield curve being the highest rate. Whereas if it was normalized, the long end of the curve, the bond end of the curve would be the
Mhm.
highest rate. And typically the highest rate is what you subtract from the rate of inflation in order to understand in terms of purchasing power what you're getting returned. Right? So if you look at
Mhm.
the official government headlines, they say that the CPI is 3.3%. Okay, well, since you can get a government treasury bill for 5.5%, then you have to take the 5.5% that you're earning in the treasury bill, and then you have to deduct the 3.3% increase in prices because that's going to tell you that your real return on purchasing power. Right? So if you use the government's numbers, if you lend them money today, at the end of the year, you will be able to buy 2.2% more stuff. So in terms
Mhm.
of purchasing power, yeah, you bought a bill that says 5.5%, but because prices are going up 3.3%, you're really only going to be able to buy 2.2% more stuff. That
Mhm.
that analysis is called the real rate of return. Understanding the rate of return in terms of purchasing power, not just the numbers on the screen, because that's what matters to us, how much we can buy with our time and
Right.
energy, right? In Venezuela, everybody was a millionaire, but
Yeah.
nobody was rich. So it didn't matter. It doesn't matter how high the nominal numbers go. It matters the quality of life and standard of living that can be produced with your production and allows you to consume with your purchasing power at a rate that was greater than the year before, right? Because that's when lending money makes sense to somebody. You don't lend money to somebody so that they pay you back and then you can buy less stuff with your money.
Right.
That's not, you're better off just keeping your money under your mattress and not taking any
Yes.
risk, right?
Yeah.
So
True.
you need a positive real rate of return to be incentivized to lend your money to somebody. Well, just take a look at this. We go back and we say the CPI we use the 1982 equation, government equation. right? So I know a lot of people know about trueflation. Trueflation, they have a proprietary equation. That's why they say inflation is lower than what the government says it is. They're using their own equation to calculate inflation. I didn't want to do that at Govflation. So at Govflation, we use the government's equation, right? This has nothing to do with my opinion. This
Hmm.
is just the government's methodology, and really it took place in 1983. And I have a really good tweet. I wish I could pull up, but people should just check it out because um, you can see it on X. And I talk about how there's this website called WTF happened in 1971.com, and it brings you to like these charts that show you when they remove the gold from backing those layer two
Hmm.
paper dollar solutions, all these things that changed in the economy because of the effects of inflation, basically. And so we have a website called WTF happened in 1983.com. And if you go to what WTF happened in 1983.com, it'll actually just redirect you to this site. Because what happened is they changed the CPI methodology and they changed
Hmm.
the cost of goods index to a cost of living index. And basically, what that means is in 1982, they measured inflation based on a constant standard of living. So if you like filet mignon, then the constant standard of living is going to tell you how much it costs based on you eating filet mignon every night because that's what you want and that's a constant standard. When they changed it from the cost of goods index to the cost of living index, they introduced what was called substitution hedonics. And what it does is it tries to say, if the price of filet goes up but the price of hamburger meat goes down, then the consumer is not going to buy the filet, they're going to buy the hamburger meat. So they're making an assumption, they're making that
Hmm.
demand assumption based on price that I will buy the hamburger meat instead of the filet. But that's the whole point. If I was eating filet and I want filet, but now I have to eat a hamburger, the quality of life, the standard of living has gone down. I'm not trying to
Decreases.
measure, I'm not trying to
Hmm.
measure uh, the amount of my quality of life and standard of living if it goes down. What do I care if it goes down? I'm trying to avoid that. I'm working my ass off so my quality of life and standard of living can go up, not so that it can
Right.
go
Right.
down. I don't really
Or,
care.
or, at or at least remains stagnant,
Or,
right?
yeah, or
Or
at
at
least
least,
stay the same, right? At least stay the
yeah.
same. But that's why having a constant standard of living, measuring for a constant standard of living is so important because if if that goes up and you're not beating it, then you can identify that your quality of life and standard of living are going down, right? But when the equation tries to do it for you, basically people what people do who use these official government headlines are saying is, yeah, I'm okay with my quality of life and standard of living going down. Everything that money gets printed
Hmm.
for, I believe in, and I'm willing to give up my quality of life and standard of living in order for them to spend that money on my behalf. Well, we don't believe
Right.
that. And govflation is taking the opposite side of that and saying, hey, I want to measure the quality of my life against the constant standard of living. And that's going to allow me to understand if my quality of life is going up or down. And then I can direct my efforts or my business decisions based on the direction of my quality of life or standard of living. And it's at 11.1%. So when you take the 5.5% that you get from the treasury bill and you subtract it from real inflation that measures a constant standard of living at 11.1, look at your rate of return. Negative, negative
Right.
5.6%. Well, when the real rate of return is negative, you should not lend your money. Why would you? You're getting back less purchasing power. You're losing. You're lending money. And when you get paid back, you can buy 5% smaller home, a
Yeah.
5% shittier car,
Yeah.
5% less food and snacks for the family. Why would you lend your money and be okay with being able to buy back less once you finally
Less.
get paid
Hmm.
back? It doesn't make sense. This is part of the reason they have to use methodology to manipulate the output of this number because it see real return on the official government headlines is green. Green means good. Real return on the govflation headline is red. Red means bad. So according to the government numbers, yeah, you should lend them money. You're going to increase your purchasing power. But according to the real numbers, no, you should not lend your money to the government. You're going to lose purchasing power. Now, when they raise interest rates and then they force more money to be spent, that increases CPI. So let's say
Hmm.
they raise the interest rate from 5% to 6%. Okay, well, the real inflation rate let's just start with the government. The government inflation rate could go from 3.5% to, I don't know, say 5.5%. Well, now the real rate is zero, right? So they raised the interest rate. You would think when they raise the interest rate, the real rate of return would go up. But because when they raise the interest rate, it forces the fiscal side to create inflation, CPI goes up. And because that forced inflation raises CPI, it actually reduces the real rate of return. And
Hmm.
that's what's happening here. Because of the mountains of debt, because there is just so much debt, we no longer have monetary dominance. We have fiscal dominance. And when you raise interest rate in an environment of fiscal dominance, it actually lowers the real rate of return. So any
Hmm.
money manager who's worth their salt and his job is to protect and preserve not just the nominal number on the screen, but the purchasing power of that number through time and space, is not going to be willing to lend their money to the government just because they raise interest rates. And this is what you were talking about before. The To me, one of the most important things that's going on in the marketplace. They have really lost the ability, not that they want to raise them any higher. If they raise them any higher, the economic stress, I think, will just become blatantly evident. So they're limited by
Hmm.
the economy on how much they can raise them anyway. But you would think, oh, in an emergency situation, we could just raise rates and then people will be, they'll be lining up in droves to lend us money. Yeah, but people who understand the difference between a nominal rate of return and a real rate of return are going to be
Hmm.
less interested, not more interested. And that's one of the
Right.
biggest problems in all of macro and finance today.
Amazing analysis. Just to speculate a bit, if gold standard was never abandoned, how would the world look like, and would we have all of these problems?
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I think we would be in a better position economically, at least. I don't know about, what's very interesting, and this might ruffle some feathers, but this is actually true. When you go back and you look like the fall of Rome and Greece
Yeah.
and even Weimar Germany, um, sexual depravity was very
Hmm.
popular. Like cross dressing and
Oh,
swinging.
really?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, this caught me
Hmm.
off guard. I when I first heard this, I was like, no, that's not true. Like
Hmm.
this is more like a modern thing. This didn't
Hmm.
happen like way back then. I had to go do some research, but it's true. Look at the fall of Rome, sexual
Right.
depravity. The fall of Greece, sexual depravity.
Decadence.
Weimar
Hmm.
Germany, sexual depravity. And here, what do we see here in the United States? Sexual depravity. We're seeing
Okay.
all of the elements of that. That is a very interesting development, in my opinion, because that's the when you ask that question, where would we be today? I'm thinking of it more of like on a social and cultural level than I
Hmm.
am on an economic level. Because economically, the answer is obvious. Economically, we would be much more sound than where we are now,
Hmm.
because the limited supply of gold would have
Naturally, would
shed a light.
restrict.
It would have shed a light
Hmm.
on the amount of leverage in the system. But you remove gold from there, and then the leverage in the system becomes unclear. And then it was
Right.
that transition away from gold that really warped all of the economic incentives. A lot of natural laws of economics today are not obeyed, and a lot of
Hmm.
behavior cannot be anticipated because the incentives are so warped that we this is what happens. You get into social and cultural decline. That the money
Can you expand on
system.
that? I don't see the clear connection.
Yeah, so when you have to go to work, I know in the United States here
Hmm.
we probably have a lot of people who are starting to recognize the quality of our services industry is starting to fall. And the reason that the quality of our services industry is starting to fall is because these people, they might be making more money, right? Like they used to work at the restaurant and every single
Hmm.
night they take home 100, $200 in tips. Now they're taking home $200 and $400 in tips, but they're buying less stuff. They're making more money, but their quality of
Hmm.
life and standard of living is lower. So when they go into work, they're not as happy because their quality
Hmm.
of life and standard of living is lower. So this fiat system has lowered our quality of life and standard of living. And that affects the mindsets and behaviors of human beings. the same human beings that we need to interact with in order to have an economy. So when the quality of services fall, you treat people differently, and then when that starts to
Hmm.
happen over a long period of time, it actually turns into like social and cultural decline. That the source of social and cultural decline is unhappy people. That's
Hmm.
really what it is. Unhappy people, unfulfilled people start to come up with these crazy ideas of why
Hmm.
am I here? Why do I exist? Am I a man or a woman? They just start asking any type of question that you can ask because they're
Hmm.
confused, because life doesn't make sense, because they're working hard, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but they're falling behind instead of getting ahead. So there seems to be no answer, and that leads to
Hmm.
social and not just like sexual depravity, but violence, crimes. All of that stuff
Hmm.
starts to pick up. It's all connected, and the Jesus said it this way: the love of money is the root of all evil. So the
Yes.
root of all evil is always going to trace back, I believe, to the incentives that are formed by the money system. So when you ask if we stayed on
Hmm.
gold, would we be in a better place? I think economically for sure, but I think even socially and culturally we would be in a better place. But
Hmm.
gold is old, and Bitcoin is engineered money. Gold is natural money. Bitcoin is the technological upgrade, and it is an engineered money. And if we make this engineered money our base layer of money for humanity, we can kind of swing over to the other side of the pendulum. Fiat currency has swung us so far to the wrong side that we're now starting to see
Hmm.
all that stuff. We're starting to see the crime. We're starting to and by the way, what is crime? Look at all the people who are crossing borders, not just here in the United States, but in Europe as well. If you or me tried to walk into another country, they would arrest our ass and throw us in
True.
prison. If we tried to
Yeah.
vote in their elections, we'd be in jail. But they are
Hmm.
committing crimes because these crimes are illegal. They're actually laws that have been passed and should be enforced by every country, not just the United
Hmm.
States or Europe. Every country should enforce their border laws for their own good of their own country, and every country's leader should look out for their own country. But those laws are being broken in Europe and the United States. But if you try to break those laws elsewhere as a European or a US citizen, you're going to go to jail. So all of it is connected. All of it really stems
Hmm.
back to the money system. And if we can replace the fiat system, or at least integrate Bitcoin into that system, then we can start to turn this trend from humanity falling into depravity to start to come back to truth, because that's where happiness is going to come from, when you can live in the truth, when there's justice, you can live in
Right.
truth. But in today's world, we have a double tiered justice system. Everybody feels it. Everybody knows it. That's why this upcoming election is such a big deal here in the United States with Biden and
Hmm.
Trump, because the country has never been so divided. This country has never been so divided. By the way, that's a tertiary risk. How do you feel about lending the U.S. government, the federal government, money when the country is the most divided it's ever been? And it wouldn't be the first time the country split. And what happened last time the country split? The first thing that happened, the South made a new currency. They made a new money. They were
Hmm.
out of the system, so they needed to create their own economic system. So God forbid something like this would happen. You know, what's the value of U.S. Treasuries if a couple of states start to disagree with the federal government and it turns into something serious? Like there's a lot of risk here, um, and
Hmm.
Bitcoin is the source of de-risking. Bitcoin is the source of I am outside of that system. Like I have what I need inside the traditional system to live, and to fulfill my obligations, but I want most of my wealth outside the system, where I don't have to deal
Hmm.
with the fallout or consequences of the decisions that are being made inside the system. And that's really what Bitcoin does for us. It gives us that angle, and it gives us that opportunity to protect our time and wealth in a system that when the bubble pops and pretty much everything falls, um,
Hmm.
when the ashes and the dust settle, Bitcoin will be there left over, and I would say pretty much everything else is going to be dead.
Amazing. Thank you. Um, okay, so you're putting a lot of faith in Bitcoin. Uh, However, we haven't yet seen the adoption to the levels that some molecule would expect. Is that necessary to happen?
Unfortunately, it's not necessary.
Hmm.
Bitcoin's 10-year CAGR is 60%, which is the best performing in the asset in the world by far. So uh, it's kind of just happening because of economic incentive. It kind of goes back to like, why are people worse today than they were 50, 60 years ago? No, I don't think so. It's just that we're in a different scenario, so we react different. Human nature didn't change from Rome to
Hmm.
Greece to the USA. It's just that the scenario that you're putting the human in has changed, and that kind of that variable again. Here we are again to that it's the human variable that's unpredictable. It's the human variable that can cost itself by removing itself from the equation. I
Hmm.
don't think that
Hmm.
adoption is needed with Bitcoin is doing itself, doing what it's going to do because the economic incentives around its engineered design, so it doesn't need humans to perform.
Hmm.
But because it's delivering that value proposition, regardless if adoption accelerates or stagnates, Bitcoin is going to continue to obey the economic laws it was designed to follow. And that can empower anybody who accepts the system. But going back to what you were saying with that's in terms of store of value. But yes,
Hmm.
if when it comes to medium of exchange, we want people to adopt because that's a whole added extra layer of base layer demand, and that added layer of demand against the limited supply is going to create performance. So yes, it needs it for medium of exchange and to kind of get those L2s, like paper fiat
Yeah.
currency units were for gold. Yeah, if we want to see that added base layer of demand of medium of exchange, we need adoption. But even if we don't see that, the store of value
Hmm.
proposition is well enough valuable to
Yeah.
people to continue its emergence as the leading asset class in the world, performance based.
In terms of the regulatory environment, there were, this year something happened with ETF and so on. How do you see that the ability from the regulatory environment to prevent the growth of the Bitcoin adoption and everything that comes with it?
Yeah,
How do you see that
that's
relation?
a really good question because a lot of traditional people that I talk to, um, especially very successful older ones who have kind of
Hmm.
figured out how the system works and perfected their strategies and have become very successful. Um, they're very tied into this idea of Bitcoin's regulatory issues.
Right.
But after the ETF, as you said, we're fully green lighted here, right? When
Hmm.
when when Larry Fink's lawyers tell them that they can launch the ETF, and then when BlackRock starts buying their own ETF to put into the portfolios that they build for their clients, we are so far beyond regulatory issues.
Hmm.
There are zero remaining regulatory issues for Bitcoin. But remember, Bitcoin is not crypto, so those are two different things.
Yes, that's
Um,
what I wanted. My
yeah,
next question, conflation.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is like full green light, pedal to the metal, 100%. There's
Hmm.
no questions or concerns. Um, and if you think there are, then you just read the read the laws. There are no questions and concerns. The largest
Hmm.
money managers in the world are now offering this product to the world. So questions and concerns are zero from the regulatory
Right.
perspective, from the legal perspective, from the accounting perspective. I mean, everybody in that BlackRock boardroom had their questions answered sufficiently, and the legal team said,
Right.
"Yes, we can do this. We feel comfortable as the largest asset manager in the world. We feel comfortable offering this product." And that's because Bitcoin was wheeled and dealed and peeled and done everything that you can try to break that puppy down, and it couldn't be broken down. So Bitcoin greenlight. Now crypto, and then this is why the Ethereum
Yes.
ETF announcement is such big news, because if the Ethereum ETF goes through, and here's another legal issue going on that a lot of people don't hear about, and that is the Chevron precedent. So the
Hmm.
Chevron precedent is about um, government agencies and courts, um, when they go to prosecute, and the judge under Chevron's declaration, the judge would need to rule in favor of the agency when it came, when it came to what was going on, the rules of the agency would take precedent over the situation or the judge's opinion. But if the Chevron decision gets overturned by the Supreme Court, which we should find out in a couple of weeks, I believe, then
Hmm.
then what that will do is that will enable judges to make decisions on a situation by situation basis. So basically, if something is a security, or if the court had to rule based on the regulatory agency's rules versus his opinion of the situation at hand, and if that changes, then that's going to be really good for Bitcoin and Bitcoin companies. And I don't really I'm not a fan of crypto or crypto companies.
Hmm.
So I think I just want to know that innovation is going to be safe here in America. And I think there are, you see that People's Reserve, there are different ways to integrate um, tokenomics into your business model. It doesn't have to be about issuing a security
Hmm.
and sending dividends to them. These tools can be used like Chuck E. Cheese tokens or frequent flyer miles. When you
Right.
fly on your favorite airline and you get miles, and then eventually you accumulate those miles and you use those miles to get a free flight. Was that a dividend? No, that was a loyalty reward. You're a loyal user, and there's an internal system that's rewarding loyal users. So I think there's a lot of room for integrating tokenomic models into a business
Hmm.
model, with the underlying company being a Bitcoin company. People's Reserve is a
Hmm.
Bitcoin company. You know why? Because Bitcoin is the reserve asset of the internet economy and the most pristine form of collateral in the world. It's the first discovery of real money, and nothing else can compete with Bitcoin as money. And if you think you can compete with Bitcoin as money, you're a fool. You're an idiot. Nothing should be
Right.
competing with Bitcoin as money. Bitcoin is money. It's engineered money. It's the last money that humanity will ever really need. It's here.
Hmm.
It's here now. Nothing can compete with it. So that's a Bitcoin mindset. So you see these crypto companies who are trying to compete with Bitcoin, or you see this meme coin stuff going on, which is just
Yeah.
another sign of the weakness of the economy. People just gambling, trying to get lucky. Um, this is all shit. This is all bad in the long run. But
Hmm.
where we can be good in the long run is acknowledging what Bitcoin is, but then also acknowledging different forms of tokenomics that can enhance a business model to empower the community of the business, right? So if you use
Hmm.
a Bitcoin exchange today, you can never benefit from that. If you're using a private Bitcoin exchange, all the profit from that, all the benefits of that go directly to the private company. There is no
Hmm.
design to deliver rewards. There's no design um, to incentivize loyalty, to keep you as a customer. It's just about profit.
Hmm.
It's all profit maximalism, and it's all profit driven. I think that we're going to see new business models that
Hmm.
have tokenomics that are clearly defined and integrated into their business ecosystem, that have nothing to do with being a security and have nothing
Hmm.
to do with being money that's trying to compete with Bitcoin. It's a technological advancement of the loyalty system business model for the most
Hmm.
efficient type of loyalty system that can maintain your customers, but more importantly, even reward your customers for participating
Hmm.
within your community versus a different community. And that's, to me, that's really exciting, that we're going to be able to see that happen here in the United States. But we have to be careful, because we saw the ETH ETF. Now we're seeing a Solana ETF. I mean, what's
Yes.
next? Dogecoin ETF? Would it with all these other like shit scams? So you have to
Yeah.
be. It's a slippery slope, and we have to be careful on
Hmm.
how far we slip down that slope. But we don't want to destroy innovation, but we also don't want to. We don't want to make
Embrace
scams.
something that is not sound. Right.
Yeah, that's not good for the economy. It's not good for the consumer. It's only good for the founders of that specific project, who are sitting on billions, and sometimes in these coins trillions of uh, coins that they all issued to themselves for no reason. No thought went into it. No fair launch. Um, it's just not
Hmm.
not a good precedent to set. So I definitely think, Bitcoin, green light, we're good to go. Ethereum looks
Hmm.
like it's going to get the green light. Um, and then after that, I hope they slow down the pace a little bit. I don't want to see,
Hmm.
Solana, you know why Solana is getting attention? Because all the big people who invested in Solana, who are sitting on millions of tokens, are now using some of their purchasing power to push it forward, take advantage of the momentum and push it forward because they want exit liquidity. They can't dump on the market, the crypto market, it's not big enough. But if ETFs
Right.
come in, they can dump on ETFs and cash out. So that's happening. People need to realize that that's happening, and that's the main driver behind
Hmm.
a Solana ETF. Not that Solana is a better Ethereum and we need to protect consumers because Solana might end up working better than Ethereum. No, that's not the that's not what's driving people to
Yeah.
launch. It's because they participated in the seed rounds and they're sitting on millions and millions, sometimes even billions of dollars, and they can't get out
And they
until
can
certain levels
influence.
of liquidity can get
Hmm.
in, and they're looking for exit liquidity. So we need to be really
Right.
careful on what we do and how we do it. But I do believe there's room for crypto companies who understand that Bitcoin is money and nothing
Hmm.
can compete with it, and adopt a tokenomics model to reward their community for loyalty and participation.
Are you seeing enough of those companies, or there is too much of a conflation? And
I haven't seen any of them. I haven't seen any of
okay.
them. Matter of fact, most companies, I think they just launched securities, to be honest with you. Like most companies
Hmm.
were like, oh, if you buy these tokens, then you'll earn revenue. Just like a stock pays a dividend, you'll get paid dividends from our earnings and stuff like that. And they talk about ownership and stuff like that. And then it went into the DAOs, right? So that the ownership of
Yeah.
the DAO, and like the DAO owned the assets, but the ownership of the DAO. So it was like they're just trying. It's really hard to say that they're not securities. And I haven't really come across a project who has
Hmm.
built their business around their token.
Right.
That, in other words, the demand on the token is sustainable and
Hmm.
repetitive because the use of the token delivers economic value to the holder when they're using the products and services in that ecosystem. There are a few out there for sure, but they're very few and far between. And
Hmm.
and that's the goal with People's Reserve, is that the whole business was built around that tokenomics model in order to empower our community and to reward them for participation and loyalty. No, never will you hear me say that we're competing with Bitcoin. That's just a
Right.
fool who would say that.
Yeah.
And never, never would you hear me say that it's a security, because it's not. You can own the tokens, but you're not going to own a portion of the company. That's not what the tokens are for. That's like you saying you going to Chuck E. Cheese and buying tokens, and because you bought tokens from Chuck E. Cheese, you now own a portion of the company. No, you need those tokens to play their games. Well, see,
Right.
companies can use this tokenomics model and integrate it into their business model in order to reward participation and loyalty. And that is the next big move of these ERC20 tokens, in my opinion, with ETH
Hmm.
with potentially getting the green light. The ERC20s are probably going to get some extra light because they're a derivative of the ETH network. But how you take advantage of that to empower your customers and to enhance your business is going to be what's important. And I think it'll be very clear between which companies wanted to empower their customers and enhance their business versus which companies
Hmm.
were just selling securities to raise money.
Right. Amazing analysis. Thank you. Um, okay, just one question briefly, and this is something also I wanted to ask you. But before we go into that, um, you really put a lot of value to the Bitcoin comparing to other cryptocurrencies for the right reason. But what do you say are some challenges with the Bitcoin ecosystem? Are there any, and how do you see that evolving?
Yeah, there's a few challenges, and that's a great question. The first challenge and most important challenge, I think, is banking regulation, because
Hmm.
banks, at least banks here in the United States, pretty much banks everywhere, because of the Basel banking regulations and guidelines, um, they don't name Bitcoin as a tiered asset. So banks are really only able to hold a tiered asset, and
Hmm.
that's not possible for banks. So banks couldn't hold Bitcoin today, even if they wanted to. So that's a pretty big obstacle that's going to take
Hmm.
politicians will need to solve that. The crypto community. I saw somebody shared it. I think it was Mr. Hoddle. He shared a thing. It was like the crypto super PAC for politics in U.S.
Hmm.
government raised like $170 million, and 33 out of the 35 people that the super PAC backed won their elections. So they're 33 and 2, 33 wins,
Hmm.
2 losses, and they got $100 million war purse. So it's crypto is becoming Bitcoin and crypto are becoming a more important talking point in
Hmm.
U.S. politics, and that's actually a good trend because it's going to take US politicians to update existing banking regulations.
Hmm.
And we need to update those regulations to allow for Bitcoin to be considered a tiered asset, which would then allow the bank to hold Bitcoin potentially even as a reserve. So that is not going to happen until the laws change. It's just that simple. It cannot happen until the laws change. So that's
I
probably
think
the
I
go ahead.
yeah, sorry. I think I read your tweet saying that uh, they had to, if I got that well, top of my mind, they had to sell the Bitcoin and to get back the US dollar. Maybe from a few days ago. Did
Yeah, I've been on a tweet blitz lately, so I'm not sure which one it is, but yeah, the
they
banks
couldn't
the
keep they
bank
couldn't hold on the Bitcoin. Yeah.
right. So the banks are not gonna they're just not allowed to hold Bitcoin. So that's a pretty big obstacle to getting
Hmm.
Bitcoin into the banking system. But ultimately, I think that there is room for innovation and growth because you don't have to be a bank. You can be a non-bank financial services provider and
Hmm.
still and partner with a bank and still you're going to be fully regulated and licensed and whatnot for what your legal requirements are, but at the same time um, you're not a bank, so you can hold Bitcoin on your balance
Yeah.
sheet. So
Hmm.
there are loopholes and ways around it, but ultimately I think what we really want to see to get the Bitcoin economy becoming that base layer of money that underpins the entire system, banks are going to need to hold it. So that's my number one obstacle is those tiered
Hmm.
banking schedules that allow banks to actually even just touch Bitcoin. The second one I think is going to be education.
Hmm.
So people are just so blind to this, and I
Hmm.
went I went to college, and for some people it works, for some people it doesn't work. For me, it didn't work. I didn't Some people, it doesn't work for some people, it doesn't work for other people. And what happens is there's no consistent curriculum or education, especially on the
Hmm.
money side of things, right? So if people go to school to be electrical engineer or forensics or whatever, that's fantastic. That's great. Congratulations. I'm really happy for you. Um, but I guarantee you, you don't know anything about money and you don't know anything
Hmm.
about currency. And I can talk to people with master's and doctorate degrees who cannot tell me the difference between money versus currency. They just don't know because they've never been
Hmm.
taught. And that doesn't just start in post education. That starts in the from the earliest ages. So I think one of
Hmm.
my goals actually is to build a private school. I have tweeted about this before. Build
Oh,
a private
really?
school that teaches the most important things, like when you're a kid, how to plant and garden, how to take care of animals, how to just all the important stuff, right? Like reading and writing and hands-on
Hmm.
stuff. And then as you get a little bit older, and you got the reading and writing and arithmetic down, now you really concentrate heavy on the hands-on stuff, working in cars, balancing checkbooks, starting companies, uh, doing taxes, all of this stuff that they don't teach you in 6th grade through 12th grade before you go to college. It's look at what has happened to the education in this, and specifically here in the United States. Our education system is a joke. The
Hmm.
I don't know what our rating is globally, but I know it's fallen dramatically. We're not even like top 30 in education in the
Hmm.
world. That's embarrassing. That's our kids. That the root of that is money, because parents have become so now, back when the economy was
Stress.
strong, Only one parent
Mhm.
needed to work. The other parent could stay home and take the kids
Yeah.
and teach them stuff. Now both parents need to go work just to get by, just so they can make your credit card bill debt
Mhm.
payment. So the kids,
Mhm.
what do? We hand them off to the education system, and the education system has been corrupted. The education system has been diluted, and the education
Mhm.
system is causing more harm than good. And thank God I live in a
Mhm.
state that I live in Florida where we have school choice, so I can send my kids to private and have a portion of
Mhm.
that covered as a tax-paying Florida resident. So we need to up the ante on education because that's one of the biggest obstacles. I talk to really smart people about Bitcoin, and they think I'm a lunatic. They think I'm crazy. And
Yeah.
I've probably forgotten more about monetary history and accounting and finance than they even know. And they think I'm crazy because I'm talking about things that they have never, it's not just that they haven't been taught, they've never even heard this before. Right? Like when you hear someone talk, you're like, holy, I've never even heard that before. This guy is fast. Those end up being the people you end up following on Twitter and really starting to listen to what they have to say because they're bringing value to you. It's not You're not hearing the everyday thing from them being regurgitated, right? Like
Right.
a lot of what I said here today is my own opinion, and you will not hear it
Mhm.
anywhere else on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now,
Some of the
some of what I
concepts are really unique. Yeah.
yeah. So now
Yeah.
some of what I said, everybody's going to be saying, but when we really dig into the details, you're not hearing this anywhere. And that's what's important about true education. True education gets you to
Yeah.
think for yourself and it creates debate and iron sharpens iron and we can move forward in technology and innovation and economy and social and culture, the whole 9 yards. But that's why we're moving backwards right now. My wife just
Right.
told me that there's people up in the International Space Station. We can't even, they're stuck up there. We can't even go get them. So we're supposed to be going to
Yeah.
Mars
Right.
soon, right? We're supposed to be building out on
Yeah.
Mars. We can't even get two people from the International Space Station. So things seem like they're going backwards, not forwards, and that starts with the education of our kids. That starts with our
Mhm.
children
Mhm.
going through a strict curriculum that teaches them the difference between money and currency and how an economy really
Mhm.
works. Those topics are completely ignored K through 12 in the United States, and it's enabling the abuse of the system by the government because people don't understand it. So, banks being able to hold Bitcoin, education are my two biggest obstacles for Bitcoin, in my opinion, that really don't have a solution right now. We can't
Mhm.
just wait for this to take place. We have to continue to be active in politics and to educate politicians. Sit with
Mhm.
the politicians on the panels at the conferences. Be nice to them. Learn from them. Try to teach them something. Educate them because they got to change the laws. And then care about your children. Let's get our kids learning the right things in schools and let's get all of this. I see on the news down here in Florida there's like 3 or 4 states now that have a Satan club in school, like an after school Satan club. Like how is that? What does that have to do with school? And then they say, well, they have a Christian club. Okay, well then here's an idea: no clubs, no clubs whatsoever. You want to do a club? You go outside of school to do a club, and you do it with the community of people that you get along with. You don't if you
Mhm.
can't if you have one, so you need the other. Well, then have neither of them because it's just not right. And that's what's happening in school. We're teaching kids about satanic philosophy versus
Mhm.
money and currency. And then we wonder why they come out of school thinking that they're a boy instead of a woman or a woman instead
Yeah.
of a boy.
Yeah.
Are you confused how that's happening? Because you're letting the state attack our children from the
Mhm.
moment you put them into those institutions. Those institutions need to be reformed and they need to be
Mhm.
reformed now. They need to be reformed much sooner rather than later because we're going to
Mhm.
live with the negative consequences of that. But great question and uh, I hope we continue to see progress on both of those fronts, but it's going to take Bitcoiners. The state isn't going to
Mhm.
build some school that does this. It's going to take Bitcoiners who want to invest in their children and their communities' children to build a school and to offer this value to the marketplace. And it's going to take people who care about the sustainability of the United States dollar and the quality of life and standard of living to get these politicians to update these banking regulations so that banks can hold Bitcoin and start to offer products and services that can empower we the people.
CJ, what you just shared is something really, really interesting that some of the thoughts expressed, yes, some of them exist as a, I think I've heard even Peter Thiel saying, hey, in 70s, they stopped the progress. And there's a lot of that. But some of the things are really unique. And I would like to finish this conversation with something really original that made me thinking. And you see Bitcoin as a truth, some kind of a divine restoration to that. And it's kind of a very original and unique concept. Uh, I would love if you can expand on that. How did you come to that? And I think I even watched your speech at the union, at the place that you visited. But how come that you connected these two things? Something that exists as a holy book for 2,000 years, and the technology that just showed up in the decade or so.
Yeah, great question. And this is actually one of my favorite topics. Um, Typically, I talk about the Bible or I talk about Bitcoin and nothing else.
Yeah.
So, in this case scenario, when it comes to the Bible, I think what's really interesting is that in the book of Revelation, there's a prophecy that in the final days that the Antichrist would come to the earth and he would make all people, free and poor, um, rich or bond, doesn't matter. Everybody on earth will have to take a number to their name, and it will be in your right hand or your forehead. And if you don't take what they call the mark of the beast, which is the beast is like the Antichrist, if you don't take the mark of this world leader, who by the way the world is going to love and thinks is a genius, if you don't adhere to their system and take the number and or the mark on your right hand or your forehead, you cannot buy or sell. So that right there, like you said, this is from thousands of years ago. They did not have technology back then, right? That makes no sense. Like if you told somebody, "Hey, you have to take this mark in your right hand or your forehead, or you're not going to be able to buy or sell." People be like, "Well, what are you talking about? I have like gold, I have eggs, I have this, I can do that. I can buy or sell and trade very easily, no problem." So, how are you going to keep me from doing that? It's a technological system. So the Bible actually prophesies, the word of God tells us that in those final days, there will be a technological economic system that can have the power that gives one man the power to determine whether or not you can buy or sell. Because if you don't have the mark of the beast, you can't buy or sell. So that right there really caught my attention because never before ha- do I think that that was possible. Like even if it was just like a tattoo or something, you could always there's no way to know that somebody traded something with somebody else just because there's a tattoo or not. Like there's no way to log that transaction. There's no way to track that transaction. But when you start to look at like the China credit score, when you start to look at some of the capabilities of uh, non-private blockchains, um, Bitcoin being one of those, then you really start to understand. Well, hey, you know, what if one day like you have to use Bitcoin for everything, and if you don't have a digital wallet, you can't buy or sell. And it's not that like you can't buy or sell because you don't have money or you don't have something to trade. Like you might have something that you already had that you could trade, but
Hmm.
if you're going to make a trade, the record of ownership needs to be recorded, and it's recorded on the blockchain. So you can't and then if you're caught with that thing that you tried to trade and it's not yours and the record of ownership so it shows it's somebody else's, then you made an illegal trade. You broke the law
Hmm.
by making an illegal trade by not logging the trade in the blockchain so that the blockchain could keep track of proof of ownership. And then you start to think of all these things. It's like, wow, like this technology, like this just shows you how the human element is so important because we're
Hmm.
going to see the human element always human nature always tends actually to be bad. I think most people are like,
Falling.
oh, we're
Yeah.
good, we're good, we're good. No, we're not. Just look at like what's happening over and over again. We're not
Yeah.
good. And ultimately where this leads to is a economy that's run on some type of technology that can
Hmm.
that can be used to keep people from buying or selling. And I think we need to be really careful. And a lot of people go, well, CJ, it sounds like you're talking about Bitcoin. No, no, I'm not talking about Bitcoin. And this is where the additional connections come in. So my original kind of eureka moment was like, whoa, the mark of the
Hmm.
beast is a technology system used to control the economy. Interesting. Now we go back and we look at Bitcoin. We say, well, can Bitcoin be the mark of the beast? Well, I don't think Bitcoin is the mark of the beast because it's based in truth, right? And
Hmm.
a house divided against itself um, cannot survive. So if Bitcoin was part truth, part lies, it would break apart. But because it's all truth, then it reminds me of another Bible verse where Jesus says, "I am the truth." Right. So
Hmm.
his technically one of his names is truth. So anything that is truth, it must be derived from truth. And I think Bitcoin is a gift from God. I think Bitcoin is a gift to humanity to help
Hmm.
elongate our time here on earth, because without it we would be moving into this China credit score,
Hmm.
get the number, take the mark, or you can't buy or sell. Oh, you don't think Trump should be in jail? Well, then you can't fly on airplanes. Or hey, or you don't think that anybody should be able to join the country without having to do it legally? Well, you're going into the internment camp, and they can just track and trace and
Hmm.
control every little thing, and the technology exists for that to happen today. But Bitcoin then
Right.
enters in the scene and says, no, 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 we're not going to go this pathway. We're gonna require truth, and only God requires truth. Satan loves the truth because he uses it to distort people's minds and to
Hmm.
distort the reality. But he hates the truth because Jesus is the truth. And I think Bitcoin is obviously economic truth. And I think it's a gift from above for humanity to embrace truth. It's our chance to embrace truth. And if we don't embrace truth, we are we are kind of destined and doomed to eventually reject truth. I mean, that is the Bible. The Bible does say that. Like this is unstoppable. But
Hmm.
Bitcoin is a gift to us, because if we don't want to see that moment take place, if we don't want to see the arrival of the Antichrist, then humanity
Hmm.
itself is being given the decision to latch onto financial truth, elongate your time here, and postpone the emergence of this technological economic control system by embracing Bitcoin, which requires truth. And that was the title of my sermon, was Truth Money, because of all
Right.
the things that Bitcoin does. And I did point out a few other flaws, like in the banking system and being
Hmm.
a good steward with your money, right? Like the the Bible teaches that you should be a good steward
Stewart.
of your
Yeah.
money. Well, if you're lending your money to the government at a negative real rate, are you being a good steward to your money? No, you're losing money. So that's,
Right.
and I think of the parable of that Jesus taught, where the man buries the coin, right? He has three servants. He
Hmm.
gives one 2 coins, one coin, and another one coin. He comes back. The other servant's like, "Hey, I turned your 2 coins into four." The other servant's like, "Hey, I turned your one coin into two." And then the other servant is like, "Well, hey, I was scared I was going to lose your coin, so I buried your coin in the field, and now here's your coin back for you." Well, that Jesus called that person who buried his coin a wicked servant, and he
Hmm.
cast him away. He lost
Hmm.
nothing. He lost nothing. If you lend your money to the government, you're losing. You didn't bring back a whole
Right.
coin. You brought back less
Yeah.
than a coin. So if
Less
the guy
coin.
if the guy burying the coin comes back and brings the full coin and lost nothing, and he's being cast away, how much worse is the judgment going to be for the person who comes back with less than the one coin? It's going to be much worse. So Bitcoin allows us to make sure we come back with more than the purchasing
Hmm.
power of that one coin. So it's really a gift to help us fulfill our calling in the Word of God, and to
Hmm.
embrace truth, while the rest of the world races towards this um, social credit score system and universal basic income, and with it will
Hmm.
truly come hell.
Right. CJ, thank you so much. As you're like a living encyclopedia of the things, and also not only that. Now with the internet, you can find people who can learn a lot, but you also have a lot of original and unique thought. Uh, so great work. And also congratulate you for finding the time to develop these theses. I know how busy you are with. working on the project, so it's not like you have a plenty on your own to right.
Yeah, it's been a wild run. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great, and I'm really happy to be your first guest. I look forward to seeing what you produce in the future, and of
Thank
course,
you very much.
with People's Reserve too, helping us get that message out there to be a market maker to empower we the people.
Let's do it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.